you? Nice to meet you, Erica.
Hi, it's so nice to see you like live and in person.
I know. Awesome.
We've
I have
communicated.
your fabulous book here.
Oh, thank you. I
Yeah.
just got a pre-pub copy too, like literally just this week. I
Oh,
think
cool. Cool, cool.
It
Yeah,
feels real in a whole new way.
it's funny because I guess we know each other from Instagram, right?
Right. I think that's where it all started. Yeah.
Yeah, Instagram. So we've been talking for a few years now on Instagram. And I know I went off Instagram for a while and now I'm just on there again, just giving it another try.
Yeah.
But cool. Yeah. So I think I'm just going to start by reading the back of the book. It says you're a certified master gardener, professor of environmental history at Northland College, the author of Empire of Vines, Wine Culture in America, writes regularly for Orchids magazine and blogs with growing tips and orchid history at orchidmuse.com, which I've gone to. Nice little website you have there. And you live in Wisconsin.
I do.
So you've written this fabulous book. I read it from cover to cover. One thing that I really liked about this book was that it actually touches, I love orchid history. I think it's one of the most fascinating things about growing orchids, if you know the history behind them. Is that you touched a lot of the areas. I think every area in the book is an area that I'm interested in terms of orchid history. You talked about the Gilded Age, Helen Gold. You talked about Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, Empress Dowager Cixi, which was really interesting. I loved reading that. And Raymond Burr, who's one of my favorite old-time Hollywood actors, who I didn't know was a closeted gay person, and also had this enormous orchid collection, which I thought was awesome. So I thought we would talk about the book a little bit and then dive into the Eden Musee part of the book, if that's okay.
Awesome. Oh, sounds fun.
Okay, cool. So why did you write this? Like what prompted you to write this?
Honestly, I, like you, love orchid history. And I had spent probably the past 5 years reading every orchid history I could possibly find in English, some in Spanish if I felt like I could read it slow enough. Yeah. And I got to thinking that a lot of orchid history, or sort of the fundamental backbone of orchid history, is really about explorers going into jungles. These are usually white, elite, European or American explorers, male, going into jungles, ripping orchids out of them, bringing them back. And so those stories are true. Those stories are important. But I wanted to know about other people. I wanted to know how women, people of color, people of all walks of life had also engaged in orchid history, because we know that was a thing. I mean, like orchids, yes, in the 19th century were very much sort of promoted as a kind of rich person's pastime. But there's all kinds of other things that are happening that are not as well recorded, but that we might still be able to access. And I looked for that book, and I looked and I looked and I thought, and I was like, that book doesn't exist. No. And then I was like, oh shoot, I need to write that book.
Yeah.
And it was honestly the most fun project I've ever done in my life. My previous book was about wine, and that was a very fun book too, but that was a dissertation turned book, and that had that has its own kind of pain to it. And this, honestly, there was like no pain. It was just awesome.
Yeah. And you've done a good job of covering those areas, right? You talk about all kinds of different people, and a lot of people who are into orchids probably won't know a lot about certain people in here, so it's good you're going to bring that to light and bring that to a wider audience for sure. So one thing that I've noticed about orchid history is it's very much rooted in egos and snobbery.
Yeah. And
do you think that part of that history is repeating itself today in orchids? I'd love to hear your opinion on that, because I have an opinion on it, which I will share later.
Well, I guess there's egos and snobbery in everything. I guess from my own personal experience so I have grown orchids myself for almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
And it's really ramped up in about the past decade.
Yeah.
And within the past 6-7 years, I joined 2 orchid societies, and I traveled to events and just like really getting down with the community of it. And at least from what I have, what I've experienced is that at least the orchid communities that I know and that people that I've spoken with are just incredibly kind. The biggest one I'm a part of is the Orchid Society of Minnesota in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And they kind of did this little promo spot for it a few years ago, and they interviewed people about like what they love most about the society, and like literally every last person said the people, and that's exactly what jumped to my mind too. There are certainly, I think there are, I guess instead of egos, I guess the way I would frame it is like there's definitely still orchid royalty.
Yeah.
Royalty in the sense of like established orchid houses that have a particular prestige.
Right.
And those can also still be very friendly houses, but sometimes they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
So yeah, I guess that's where I would put it, but I want to hear your opinion for sure.
I definitely think that there is. I mean, I've encountered it a lot. I'm a pretty friendly person, and I think I'm one of those rare people in the orchid world. I actually just love the plants.
Yeah.
I don't care about the awards. I don't really care. Like I really just from an early age, I felt a strong resonance and a spiritual connection to plants.
Yeah.
So I absolutely adore plants and just the way they grow and just that aspect of it. So everything else is just silliness to me. Right. So I find I'm very sensitive to that. And I find that I've encountered that a lot especially with big orchid growers who are famous and who it's just a snootiness, and sometimes they don't want to bother with you. And I've heard, I've met some of the weirdest, strangest people, which is good and bad, in orchids. And I have family members who are not into orchids, but come along with me often on trips and stuff and they turn to me and they say, gee, these orchid people are very strange.
Yeah.
And I'll say, yes, they are. And sometimes very trying, but I focus on the plants. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So,
I kind of feel like almost all of these, it sort of belittles it to call it a hobby. Maybe it's a lifestyle.
Lifestyle, yeah, it is.
But there's the type of person that is very much into the judging aspect, and I can understand why judging is important to a lot of communities for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm not in it for that either.
Yeah. I know. I look at your Instagram, and hopefully I can share some pictures here of your Instagram. But you're very much, I think we're similar in that sense. We really just love the plants, and we love growing the plants, and just sometimes I just love a plant for its leaves.
Yes.
Like a lot of orchids, like if you look at the dendrobiums, especially the harder ones, like the Australian ones, they have those plasticky leaves. And I would just love them if they didn't bloom. They're just beautiful on their own. Right. They're pseudobulbs. And so it's just the roots and
Have you ever heard Kristen Uthis give a talk?
No.
She's from New World Orchids in Michigan.
Okay. Yeah,
she gives amazing talks, and she has amazing orchids. But she breaks it down to talk about orchid flower people and orchid form people. And that is the best description I've ever heard, because it sounds very much like you're an orchid form person, and I am too. Like flowers are fine. Flowers are great. Flowers are what I post a lot of pictures of. But I want the thing in my house to be nice to look at and to touch year round.
Aesthetics.
Exactly. And so I think how that sort of breaks down is like the orchid flower people might focus on really big blooms, gigantic cattleyas or cymbidiums or kind of those things. And the form people might be a little bit more into Neophonetia or Sideria japonica, or like these, maybe the smaller ones, but they don't necessarily have to be tiny, but that it kind of all comes around that. And it has to hit those, like it has to hit at least those two buttons. And then I give extra points to something if I'm going to acquire it, if it's also fragrant.
Yes, I love fragrance. Yeah.
Because fragrance
Me
is
too.
just like becoming more and more important for some reason in my life. So
Yeah. I find as I get older, I'm more of a kookier orchid grower. Like I like the orchids that are more that I wouldn't have liked before. I still
yeah,
have my classic Cattleyas. I will always love them, but
yeah,
I find myself leaning more towards things like Masdevallias and Bulbophyllums and stuff
yeah,
like that I particularly didn't enjoy before. But
yeah,
now I'm like, wow, these are really cool. I
yeah.
guess with age comes maturity, and you have a different view on life, and you appreciate different things, right?
I think so too. Yeah, for the past several years, I guess my favorite genera have been Maxillaria,
Yeah,
especially the Variabilis, like all the different, like
so cool.
if somebody has a Variabilis for sale,
Yeah,
I'm done.
you're
Like
on
I think I have like 5 different colors.
it.
And the Arangus and Great Gum, like
Yeah,
the
totally.
form of those, especially when mounted,
Yeah,
even though almost all those flowers are just white, like
yeah,
but the spurs and the just like everything,
yeah.
I'm a super sucker
Love
for
it.
those too. Yeah.
Totally love it. I love it. So do you mind if we go on talk about the Eden Musee? I found
You
this chapter.
do.
I found this chapter very, very fascinating because as a New Yorker,
Yeah.
I didn't know this. So, and I'm just going to read some little bits of here from the book itself. That's okay.
Yeah.
So you say, rather than in a botanical garden or a civic pavilion, a college campus or a cellar's greenhouse, it turns out that the first orchid show in America was hosted by New York City's Eden Musee, of all places, a dime museum located in the heart of late 19th century Manhattan's Tenderloin district, one of the most notorious neighborhoods in all of Gilded Age America. Now, I love the Gilded Age. Like I love that era, and I find orchids, and I didn't know this. So you want to talk a little bit more about this? I'll read some more quotes after, but I'd love to hear your
Yeah.
on this.
I first have to say, I love that you love this chapter because that's the very first chapter I wrote.
Oh, cool.
That was my first actual question. Like a lot of the book was motivated by my questions into what did I want to know and what did I also think that other people would find interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, the history on this previously, really, if you're going to talk about orchid shows, you know, the written history about that is sort of starts up with, at least in the US, with the American Orchid Society and its foundation in the 1920s and sort of all of these things. And I was like, no way, you know, it has to be way earlier.
Yeah.
And so I set some parameters and that's what I kind of, talk about in that introduction is like, I wanted it large because of course there would have been small things that you just would not have the documents for, you wouldn't be able to do that. But large ones and public ones, because of course there's always going to be private, you know, yada, yada. So like where would they have it? And thankfully, I actually first found reference to those in old plant journals that had been scanned and uploaded to the Biodiversity Heritage Library. I would suggest anybody who loves anything plant history related, and if you want the primary documents, like from the moment, it's all free access. Almost all of it is public domain. Biodiversity Heritage Library.org.
Awesome. I love that.
It has an amazing search function. You can find what you want. You can find letters between botanists, you know, for centuries. It's just really interesting. So I found the first details of those shows at the Eden Musee, or Musee or Musee, as they would say in the 19th century. I found those in, I think, the American Florist, or there's like this whole host of like late 19th century garden magazines that are scanned there and that you can sort of, you know, search by even keyword.
Right.
And started going down that rabbit hole. And I was like, well, if this was in New York, then the New York Times had to have also covered this, because this is the glitterati showing up to every single one of these shows, you know, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Tiffanys, like the Van Rensselaers, like everybody is coming to this show, or at least, first of all, their wives are. And then I think they bring their husbands with them ultimately. And so I was flabbergasted and so pleasantly surprised that it happened in this space, because it went straight to my idea, or I mean, I'm sure a lot of people's idea, like orchids were not just for the very rich. I mean, yes, they had the most access. Absolutely, they had the largest collections.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they had all of this other stuff. But if the first large public orchid shows for basically almost a decade are happening in the Tenderloin district, I mean, Satan's circus of all places. That means, and with the cost of a ticket was very reasonable for a middle-class family, at least at that time, possibly lower middle class.
Yeah.
But that means, and I think the crowds alone, if the New York Times reporting was correct, the crowds alone are telling us that there's a whole lot of people really fascinated by orchids. And then I was sort of asking myself a question like, but why would people want to look at orchids in this place of menageries and quote unquote freak shows? And, I mean, there are very difficult things that go on, like to 21st century eyes looking back, there's a lot of embedded racism and sexism and I mean it's happening in the area of town, like literally flanked on multiple blocks on all sides, bordellos, whorehouses, saloons that are raging through the night. Like this is the world that people were accessing. And so how is it that orchids fit? And then you sort of realize, well, these are all brand new. I mean, this is how orchids are flowing into the United States by empire, by trade, by lots of different means, but they sort of all collect. And you've also got this like late 19th century kind of business boom of horticulturists kind of like trying to make their mark and make their displays bigger and better than the years previous and kind of all of that. And so it all just kind of came together, and then finding those black and white hand-drawn pictures of what it looks like.
I love the pictures in the book. They're awesome.
It's just, it kind of tells the story itself.
I'll share some on here for sure.
Yeah.
I like you said, and so orchids were launched onto the wider American scene within a magpie's nest of what were considered oddities at the time. Our favorite flowers taking stage in an area of town also known as Satan's circus. You know what it is? I think orchids were just so new, and I think if you're not used to looking at an orchid, especially things like Paphiopedilums and certain orchids, they do look like oddities. And so I think to people of the Gilded Age who were kind of a little out of touch, or more than a little out of touch with a lot of things, they were like freak shows in and of themselves. So I think they belonged to the Eden Musee, right? And so I think it was a perfect place for them. By today's eyes, I definitely would think no, but it's interesting to see how people sort of view things back then. There's a show, actually, I love Julian Fellowes, and one of my favorite shows is Downton Abbey. Yes. And I don't know if you've seen the show that he did called The Gilded Age.
I haven't. I watched all of Downton Abbey, but
it's so good. We just watched the last movie. It was so good. I couldn't believe how well done it was. So.
I still need to watch it.
So good. But the Gilded Age is like, it's based during the Gilded Age in New York City, and you see the orchids in the background and the the homes and of the rich, and it's very, very fascinating. And so I think that for me, like, I feel a connection to that history. So I think in a past life, it must have been a plant collector or some wealthy person in the Gilded Age, or some wealthy woman in the Gilded Age sitting around eating bonbons and looking at my cymbidium in a nice, copper pot over there.
Nice.
I like to think so anyway.
That's great. Do you find yourself like critiquing orchids in movies, like the placement of, and you're just like, oh, that would never grow there, or why does everybody have to use a fowl like to signify extreme wealth?
I know. Or they'll like I love murder mysteries, and I'll watch like a lot of British murder mysteries and like Poirot or something, and they'll do episodes sometimes with like there'll be an orchid, like there'll be a specific episode involving orchids, and they'll talk about them a certain way, and I'll say to my husband, I'll say, that's not right. That would never grow like that. What they're doing, it's just not right. Or they'll say, oh, this is a fancy orchid and it's in a hyacinth or something. And just
Right.
that's not even an orchid in the first place.
Right. I mean, Raphael, I think we're revealing ourselves as the snobs here.
Yeah, I am I am a self-confessed orchid snob. I will say that. I do look for perfectly nicely, proportioned flowers and perfect fragrance. I have a Picaviensis, which is an old, which is a Clandier by Rivera. It's an old piece of an estate plant collection. So I think, I don't know where it came from, but it's a very old plant.
Yeah.
I love it, love it, love it. The fragrance is so overpowering, and it's in my office. And when it blooms, I literally have to move it out sometimes because it's just too much for me. It's like, it just smells to me like, not to sound ageist or anything, but like an old lady's perfume.
Sure.
When those old women wear those really overpowering perfumes that, you can smell them from 2 miles away.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh.
Yeah. I once owned a Silogene flaccida.
Yeah.
I think that was it. And it was gorgeous and it bloomed amazingly. Yeah. But, I posted a picture like at a certain point in its life.
Yeah.
The scent is so overpowering, and it scratches your nose. It's very, it like gets in there and it's just scratchy.
It's cloying,
and I had posted a picture somewhere on Instagram or something, and some woman, I think from Lithuania or something, wrote back and she said, and now your house smells of a horse barn. And I was like, that's what it is.
Oh, goodness.
That's what it is. Yeah, my husband actually made me move that one out, and then I ended up selling it because I was just like, I want to be able to appreciate the flowers, but I can't. It's so
too much.
stinky.
I know. Sometimes you're just like, oh wow. But I find that's what's beautiful about orchids. I don't know if you're the same way. I find that it's kind of like bonsai. Orchids are really a journey for me. They're like, I never really, like there's plants that I purchased and I no longer have because I think they grow with you or they don't grow with you. And I find that when they get to a certain stage, you kind of realize this plant's not a good fit for me anymore. Like I don't like the fragrance. I don't like the way it grows. I don't like plants that grow all over the place. Yes. I like tidiness. So I prefer plants that are more tidy and compact and like grow up upright. There's those plants that are just like, and you're everywhere. Just like, control yourself. Oh Lord. So I always play a game, and I like to play it with you too. I always play a pick 3 game, and I always tell myself like, if I can only have 3 orchids and keep 3 orchids, which 3 orchids would I keep? So which 3 would you keep? If you could only keep 3 orchids for the rest of your life, which ones would you keep?
You're gonna do this to me.
Yes, I am.
Oh no. Oh no. All right, off the top of my head, I have to choose Maxillaria tenuifolia.
Yeah.
Maybe it's hackneyed to people, but man, once you crack the code of ultra highlight, whole lots of water, it is your best friend. And honestly, I mean, the fragrance isn't my favorite of the orchid family. I'm not a huge coconut person.
Yeah.
But the form of that orchid, like especially if you don't let it flop, if you train it and it's got those just grassy long leaves,
pretty,
and the flowers are just encircled all the way around.
Yeah.
I mean, and honestly, it'll grow anywhere.
Yeah.
I grow it in like this high light, super dry, there's no humidity in this like south facing window.
Yeah.
And it just gets blasted and it loves it. Okay, number 2. I'm just gonna hate myself because I know I'm gonna go home and I'm like, no, this is not it. Right now, I'm thinking Sideria japonica Minmaroshima. It's that variegated, tiny, cute little Sidereal, which is now Phalaenopsis, right?
Yeah.
It's actually Phalaenopsis. It's a toughie, but it's just so dang cute. It
Oh, I
never
love that.
stops being cute.
I
It's
know.
like,
I want one. I need one of those.
you do. Kristen Uthis. She's the
Okay.
one to get it from.
Yeah, you have to hook me up with some links.
She's
with
great.
it.
Yeah. Oh man, number 3. I'm gonna go with Orangus mysticidii.
Oh, that's a nice one.
Again, it's like really beautiful,
Yeah, it is.
mounted. No, mounting isn't a thing that I've always done. I've only been into it for maybe 3 years,
Yeah.
but it just, it enhances the beauty of the presentation of the orchid so much.
Yeah.
And the, the flowers kind of come out and the spurs and just everything about it is beautiful, but also the leaves are like beautifully bilobed and they're
Yeah.
really veiny.
Yeah.
So it's just beautiful all year,
Love it.
whatever you do with it. So I know I'll kick myself later, but that's my favorite 3.
Awesome. I love that. Those are great choices. I think for me, like I would definitely pick my Catalya triumphans, which I grew from a seed. It's on my Instagram right now. It is it exhibits hybrid vigor. It is such a beautiful plant. It is a huge, I love big plants, and it's like pretty much 3 feet tall, and it's so gorgeous. And the blooms are they're like rainbows to me. Like the lip is like a rainbow, and it's got the perfect fragrance. It smells like vanilla extract, but like pure vanilla extract. And it's just so beautiful. When the light hits it, it's like it's a glowing rainbow. It's so beautiful. I love it. So, and then the second one I would keep is a plant that I really, really love. I have an original division. It's Kalia Percivaliana Summit.
Okay.
And I have one of the original divisions from Longwood Gardens, which I think came from Lager back in the day. And it's beautiful. I love Catalya Percivaliana because it's more compact and it's lithophyte usually in nature. And so it loves direct sun, like it loves, and it's just compact. And the flowers are just so beautiful. And I love the fragrance because it's so unique. It's like green oranges with a little bit of moss and mold, and it's very interesting. I love it. A lot of people don't like it, but I absolutely adore it. And then the third one is my Catalya El Dorado, which is now Melisii. And I have a very rare division of a semi-alba fantasia. It's got like the paintbrush strokes in it.
Oh, wow.
And it's a small plant. It's a warm grower. I love it because you have to keep it at 70 degrees at night or else it will sulk.
Right.
It's a tiny plant about this tall, and the blooms are like huge.
Oh my gosh.
They smell exactly like spring hyacinths. You know that intense hyacinth fragrance? It's so strong, and it's just like, it's amazing how one flower can smell like another. I just think it's just so amazing, and I just absolutely love it. So
yeah. Is the Catalya Percivaliana, if I'm saying that right, that you posted, is that yours?
That's a friend. Yeah, it's a friend.
Okay. Amazing.
That's gorgeous. Yeah, I had a
beautiful.
Cixi. I got rid of it, which I now regret. But you know what? It was the right thing to do at the time. But
and the one you posted was a semi-alba, right?
Yes, that's a semi-alba.
Was that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I call that orchid the Frida Kahlo orchid.
I know, I saw that.
But it's the lavender version that she has.
Yeah, it's awesome.
In that painting.
Yeah.
That was really, really fun to kind of like.
I love that chapter about Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera and reading about that. She was such a fascinating person, and so was he actually. So
definitely.
Yeah, she was definitely ahead of her time for sure. So
yeah.
So Erica Hannickel, is that how you say your last name, Hannickel?
Yeah.
Cool. So tell everybody when's it's going to be available. You can pre-order it now, right?
You can pre-order it anywhere books are sold. It will be available December 6th.
Oh, cool.
2022.
For the holidays. Cool.
For the holidays.
Yeah, and they can pre-order it, which is awesome. This is a great, great book. I loved reading this. I really enjoyed it. And I like that you have the care tips in there too for certain, different types of orchids at the end of each chapter, which I loved. Great, great stuff here.
Thank you so much.
So wonderful chatting with you. Just amazing to finally meet you on Zoom. I hope we do this again soon.
Let's do it.
Yeah, for sure. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for chatting with me.
Thank you, Raphael.
Okay, bye.
Bye.